Aidan O'Connell teams up with Tom Brady for off-season work. Some exciting updates have come out about Las Vegas Raiders quarterback Aidan O'Connell. Apparently, he's been spending his off-season working closely with none other than Tom Brady. That's right, Aidan has been studying film with the legendary quarterback at the Raiders team facility. How cool is that? We'll dive into this more shortly. On top of that, there's also news about Maxx Crosby's contract details, particularly around his cap hits. As we all know, cap hits are key when it comes to understanding how long a team is committed to a player. The $35.5 million average value of Crosby's contract is great, but the cap hit? That's the real story. Now back to Aidan O'Connell. Mike Dixon, site manager at Vegas Sports Today, recently shared some insight about O'Connell's offseason. During an event, Dixon asked him how he was preparing for the upcoming season. O'Connell revealed that he's been focusing on adding muscle to improve his durability and performance. But here's the most interesting part. He's been putting in extra work, watching tape with none other than Tom Brady. This is a huge opportunity for O'Connell to learn from one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. While we don't know if this is a one-time thing or if they've been working together regularly, it's still pretty incredible that O'Connell is taking this initiative. What's more, a lot of experts say that O'Connell's playing style is more similar to Brady's than to the likes of Russell Wilson or Lamar Jackson. O'Connell isn't the quickest quarterback, but he's solid in the pocket with an arm that can make every throw across the field. His biggest challenge has been reading coverages and recognizing post-snap rotations. But who better than Tom Brady to help him sharpen these skills? This could really benefit O'Connell in his development, especially with the possibility that he could be the Raiders' starting quarterback next season. While there have been reports linking the team to quarterbacks like Matthew Stafford and Sam Darnold, it's clear that O'Connell is putting in the work to prove he's ready to step up. Additionally, O'Connell has added muscle this offseason, focusing on boosting his durability. Durability is going to be a big factor for him. Last season, O'Connell had a few chances to prove himself as the Raiders' future quarterback. After some struggles from Jimmy Garoppolo, O'Connell was given the opportunity to take over. While he showed flashes of potential, staying healthy and consistent will be key for him moving forward. It's great to see O'Connell taking these steps, and it's a huge shout-out to him for making the most of the opportunity to learn from Tom Brady. Durability and Maxx Crosby's contract, key factors for the Raiders' future. Let's talk about something we just can't overlook, durability. It's a huge factor, especially for a guy like Aidan O'Connell. We all know that injuries can derail a player's career, and O'Connell's had a few bumps along the way. He got hurt early on, then again after he stepped in as the starter. He had a shot to prove himself when the Raiders made the switch from Jimmy Garoppolo, and later they turned back to him after Garoppolo struggled. But unfortunately, O'Connell got hurt again, missing more time. Durability is crucial if Aidan O'Connell wants to be the long-term quarterback for the Raiders. He needs to show that he can stay healthy and be available for the team. Right now, if the Raiders want to win a Super Bowl in the near future, it's hard to imagine them going all in on O'Connell unless he can prove he can stay on the field. It's not easy to get multiple opportunities as a quarterback. Usually you get one or two chances, and if you can't take advantage of them, the team moves on. So O'Connell really has to prove he can be dependable. Now let's shift gears and talk about Maxx Crosby's contract because it ties into this idea of the Raiders going all in. Crosby's deal is really interesting and could play a big part in the team's plans for the future. The Raiders seem ready to push for a Super Bowl in the next 2 to 3 years, and Crosby's contract could be a big piece of that puzzle. As of just a few days ago, Crosby's contract had some major details. For 2025 and 2026, Crosby had zero guaranteed money, meaning the Raiders could trade or cut him without any financial penalties. But the Raiders extended his deal to what's now considered one of the highest non-quarterback contracts in the league, worth $35.5 million per year over the next 3 years, 2027, 2028, 2029. Here's where it gets even more interesting. The Raiders adjusted Crosby's contract to give him a ton of guaranteed money up front, specifically in 2025 and 2026. They raised his cap hit by $1 million for each of those years. So in 2025, his cap hit went from $27 million to $28 million, and in 2026, it went from $24 million to $25 million. Essentially, the Raiders are giving Crosby more money up front, which opens up cap space for the next couple of seasons. But it doesn't stop there. The cap hits for 2027, 2028, and 2029 are much lower. For those years, Crosby's cap hit will be around $28 million, much lower than his $35.5 million annual value. This gives the Raiders a lot of financial flexibility down the road, which could be key in signing other players or making moves for the future. Think about this. In 2027 and beyond, players like Joey Bosa, Myles Garrett, and Micah Parsons will likely be earning $35 million or more per year. Crosby's deal, with its low cap hits in the back end, is incredibly team-friendly for the Raiders, giving them the flexibility to build a strong roster without breaking the bank. It looks like the Raiders are setting themselves up for success in the next few years, and Maxx Crosby's contract is a big part of that strategy. Maxx Crosby's future and potential trades for the Raiders. I really like how John Spytek and Pete Carroll designed Maxx Crosby's contract. Here's why. If the Raiders go all in on a quarterback, say by signing Sam Darnold to a 2- or 3-year deal, Crosby's contract allows for some flexibility. During those 3 years, 2027 to 2029, the Raiders could absorb some dead cap hits if they sign a quarterback. Because Crosby's cap hits are lower in those years, the Raiders can afford to make a move for a quarterback without straining their finances. This was a very smart move by Spytek and Carroll. Now there's something I need to mention. Nothing in football is guaranteed. Remember when we thought Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper would finish their careers with the Raiders? Well, things don't always work out that way. As good as Crosby is, his contract has some tricky details. After the first 2 years, Crosby's contract has no guaranteed money from 2027 to 2029. This means the Raiders could technically trade Crosby, or he could request a trade himself. And Maxx Crosby has made it clear that if the Raiders don't win now, he could ask for a trade. Crosby is already 28 years old and might be 30 by the time those later years roll around. If the Raiders are still underperforming by then, it's possible Crosby will want out, and he'll have the leverage to ask for a trade. Here's the silver lining. If the Raiders are truly going all in over the next couple of years, it means they might actually compete for a Super Bowl. The extension for Crosby, the Matthew Stafford rumors, and Pete Carroll's age all point to the Raiders pushing hard in the short term. I can see them making the playoffs and trying to win in the next 3 years, but if they don't win and Crosby requests a trade, that contract could net the Raiders a nice return. For example, teams like the Philadelphia Eagles, who are always in Super Bowl contention, could see Crosby's contract, $28 million in cap hits for those years, as a very attractive deal. That's a very team-friendly cap hit, especially compared to other star players who will be making upwards of $40 million by then. Of course, I'd love for the Raiders to figure it out with Crosby and keep him long-term, but there's also the possibility that Crosby simply signs a new extension. We'll have to wait and see how things unfold. Rebuilding the defensive line for a Super Bowl push. If the Raiders really want to go for a Super Bowl this year, it's clear they need to make some moves. Of course, finding a quarterback is critical, but another key area for improvement is the defensive line. The Raiders need to make a move, adding 1 or 2 difference makers to their defensive front. The Raiders might need to take a serious look at the players who are becoming available in free agency or through trade. For example, the Bengals have granted All-Pro defensive end Trey Hendrickson permission to seek a trade. Hendrickson has been a key player for Cincinnati over the past 4 years, and now he's on the market. The news broke earlier that the Bengals are allowing him to explore his options. I'm really grateful for the chance to explore my options. The Bengals have given Trey Hendrickson the green light to look for a trade, which means if he wants to join another team, he can go for it. The Bengals are making this move because they have a lot of players under contract. They've franchise-tagged T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase is one of the highest-paid wide receivers. Joe Burrow is also among the top-paid quarterbacks, and they have several offensive linemen with big contracts. On the defensive side, they have a well-paid linebacker and a safety too. With so many high salaries, the Bengals need to find ways to save some money. Now let's talk about the Raiders. I'm not saying Trey Hendrickson has to be their guy, but just imagine having a player who has led the NFL in sacks for the past 2 years lined up opposite Maxx Crosby. That would be something special. While many people consider Maxx Crosby a top 5 pass rusher, not everyone agrees. Some even say that Trey Hendrickson deserves a spot in that top 5 too, and that shows just how talented he is. If I were the Las Vegas Raiders, I would seriously think about strengthening the defensive line. Remember how the Philadelphia Eagles built a powerful defensive line last season? The Raiders are close to that level. They have Christian Wilkins, a top 10 defensive tackle, and Maxx Crosby, who is also among the best. If they can bring in some more talent and help players like Tyree Wilson develop, adding someone like Trey Hendrickson could be a game changer. I even asked Twitter's AI for a list of impactful trades involving defensive ends over the last 10 years, and there were some interesting examples. For instance, Montez Sweat was traded for a second-round pick, but I don't think Hendrickson would fetch quite that much. Sweat is younger, and the Bears were eager to revamp their defensive line, which made that trade make sense. Looking at other trades, Chase Young went for a third-round pick, and Matthew Judon also went for a third-round pick. That's probably closer to what the Raiders could expect for Hendrickson. Zadarius Smith was traded for a 5th and a 6th-round pick, which is a solid deal for a good defensive lineman. Khalil Mack, although it was 3 years ago, went for a 2nd and a 6th-round pick. Mack was probably a bit better at that time than Hendrickson is now, but the Raiders should definitely consider trading for him. Of course, if they do make a trade, Hendrickson will want to be paid. That's something to keep in mind. They could structure his contract in a way that keeps the cap hits lower in the first couple of years. For example, they could sign him to a 2-year deal worth $35 million each year and create void years to lower the cap hits for the next few seasons. But it's not just about Hendrickson. The Chargers recently released Joey Bosa, another talented defensive end. While Bosa is a good player, he's been struggling with injuries and is not quite the same as he used to be. Some believe he might join his brother on the 49ers, which would be interesting. However, the Raiders should still consider reaching out to him. At just 28 years old, he could sign a 2-year deal to prove himself, maybe around $20 million a year, which is similar to what they might offer Malcolm Kuhn. In the end, the Raiders need to explore every option available. Personally, I'd probably lean towards Malcolm Kuhn over Joey Bosa, especially considering Kuhn's health. You know, Joey Bosa has missed a lot of games while Malcolm Kuhn has only had one injury. Plus, Kuhn is younger and more explosive right now. But we can't ignore Joey Bosa. He's still a player worth considering. However, the guy I really want the Las Vegas Raiders to go after is Javon Hargrave. He used to play for the Philadelphia Eagles and signed with the 49ers 2 years ago. Unfortunately, after 2 seasons, the 49ers have decided to cut him. He hasn't quite lived up to the expectations he set with the Eagles, but I still think he's a solid player. Hargrave is definitely one of the top 10 defensive tackles, but he hasn't performed like a top 5 or top 7 guy lately. If I were the Raiders, I'd seriously consider bringing him in. If Adam Butler is asking for $10 to $12 million a year and you can get Hargrave for that same amount or even less, it's worth it. He might even come at a lower price because he's older now. Imagine having Javon Hargrave at around $12 million and Adam Butler at $8 million. If you could sign both of them, that would create a powerful rotation for the Raiders. And don't forget about Tyree Wilson and possibly bringing back Malcolm Kuhn. Even Cleon Chasen could be a cheaper option than people think. This could lead to an elite defensive line for the Raiders. The Raiders need to focus on improving their defensive line to make it nearly unstoppable. Remember how the Eagles relied on their defensive line a few years ago when they made it to the Super Bowl? They even broke the sack record that year. One thing that hurt them in that Super Bowl against the Chiefs was the slippery field, which slowed down their pass rush. A bad field affects pass rushers more than offensive linemen because it makes it harder to get a good grip. Even this past season, the Eagles' defense was a major factor in their success. Saquon Barkley had an amazing season, but the Eagles' defense also dominated in several games. If I were the Raiders, I'd be looking to bring in talented players to strengthen the team. Just yesterday, the Raiders brought in Alex Kappa for $5 to $5.5 million a year, but I'm not sure he's the superstar guard they need. If they're planning to get a new quarterback this year, they'll want a solid offensive line to protect him. Unless they decide to completely revamp the defense and focus on winning that way, they need to make smart moves. Now let's wrap this up by talking about someone we all know well. Hunter Renfrow, the former Raiders wide receiver. There's been some buzz about him lately, but it's really not a big deal. He's trending because he's now working in business development for the recycling industry with the South Carolina Department of Commerce. It's an interesting shift for him. Hunter Renfrow was a great slot receiver, but that type of player is becoming rare in the NFL. He was one of the last of his kind, known for running short routes. Don't get me wrong, he could create separation, especially against linebackers. But he's on the smaller side and doesn't have the height to out-jump defenders, which limits his range. It's fascinating to see him transition into a new career, especially since he's around 28 or 29 years old. It makes sense for him to think about life after football, even though he made a good amount of money with the Raiders. He still wants to make a comeback to the NFL, so it'll be interesting to see what happens next for him. Good luck to Hunter Renfrow. He's always been one of my favorite receivers for the Raiders. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you next time with another video.